Hello everyone, this is Scarzig and welcome back to another design talk. Today we're going to be covering the blue Conjurer. Now this thing has definitely begun to, show its power and influence, right? Everybody, I think, as soon as Circulus, everybody realized Circulus was strong, everybody realized how ridiculous the blue Conjurer can be, especially because Arcanists have been played so much lately. You see a lot more of blue Conjurer, and with a card like this, that draws a random Arcanist whenever you cast a spell, you get to see over a longer sample, a bigger sample of games, a longer span of time, exactly, how consistently it pulls the really, really powerful minions. I think that even in my original video where I went over the new expansion, I talked a little bit about Blue Conjurer, and I touched on how, it has some really good outcomes, some really bad outcomes. But even if you get bad outcomes that you don't like, you can easily just replace the card, right? If you pull, an illusion, right, just a 2/1, you can just easily replace it just like you do with Circulus, or you have a cheap Arcanist that you can play to make it easier to proc your bond effects. So all in all, Blue Conjurer ended up being very, very powerful just because the overall quality of the pulls you get are, again, a lot greater than people were expecting them to be. The only thing that really sort of balances Blue Conjurer is that you have to pay the mana cost for the cards that it draws you. I mean, it's already a 5 mana 4/6, which, when compared to Dancing Blades, we know that's an extremely, decent, a very good stat line, right? A 5 mana 4/6. Dancing Blades just has a really strong opening gambit, and Blue Conjurer, if you cast spells when you bring it into play, it's 6 or 7 mana, draw 2 cards, and with a really decent body, and that really can't be ignored because of the Arcanist synergy, because it's such a value engine, right? And so Blue Conjurer as a solo value generator is unhealthy just because of how cheap it is, right? If Blue Conjurer was more expensive so that you couldn't combo as many spells with it in one turn, then it probably, well, you wouldn't see it be played as frequently, if at all, and you would see less draws. The effect is still really toxic, as we've seen, but it just happens to be in that perfect spot where, it's a card with a lot of variance to it, but it is playable, in a competitive deck at the highest levels of play. And so that's where we start to see the abuse, just like old Meltdown. Right, it even has that sort of late game in a bottle quality that Meltdown had, where it was just one card that you could throw into a deck that maybe needed some late game. Blue Conjurer, the deck needs to have cheap spells to combo with it, but it will allow you to, in some situations, just come back from a game after you've run out of gas, right? And you're in top deck mode. If you draw Blue Conjurer and you have, like, normally, right, you have like one spell in your hand and you're like, oh man, I need a body to play. I need to come back into this game. And then at the end of your turn you draw Blue Conjurer, and then your opponent might also be in top deck mode. Arcanist decks are very slow a lot of the time, so they want to just drag the game out. And if your opponent is also like struggling to finish you off, or they've been spending all their time dealing with your board, then they're trying to get some tempo, some threats on the board. And Blue Conjurer, you play that, and then you play your cheap spell, and then suddenly you've got more to work with, really big bodies that your opponent has to answer. Mechara is the most prominent example of this, right? A deck with a main win condition that Blue Conjurer can just sort of be sprinkled in because it has really good synergy with Vanar overall, with Circulus, and with all of their cheap spells. And so it gives them something else to fall back on in the late game. Blue Conjurer, is mostly seen in Arcanist decks, but if Arcanist wasn't such a great archetype, I would almost say that Blue Conjurer could just be put into any deck that's not strictly Arcanist. I think that if Vanar didn't have Circulus, Mechara probably would still run Blue Conjurer, just because, again, late game, decent body, great value generation, you just get more bodies. And you can get really huge bodies at that, and in the late game, you're just going to be casting them turn after turn after turn while your opponent's trying to finish you off. So I already talked about how the pool on average is very good. And so this kind of brings me to my next point, what I call the big 7. These are the minions that you want to draw, right? These are the very best of the best pools. That's up for debate, but their impact and quality of these minions can't be denied. So let's go over this real quick. First of all, Blue Conjurer can draw copies of itself, so I included that. We've got Calligrapher, Death Knell, Four Winds Magi, Ghost Seraphim, and Owlbeast Sage, and Trinity Wing. So you can see how these minions have undeniable impact. Getting extra copies of Owlbeast Sage or Trinity Wing is just so good for an Arcanist deck, right? You're just reloading. Not only is Blue Conjurer making your spell draw a card, making it cantrip, you're getting the Trinity Wing, which draws you more cheap spells, and then it just feeds into each other. Trinity Wing, I will say, is fine. I think that is a very well designed card. I love how it has a conditional effect. You need to have an Arcanist on board. It's very easy to have illusions on board, so maybe its effect is a little bit too easy to meet, and you do need to have room in your hand if you want to get full value out of it. And it's still a decently threatening body in its own right. So all in all, Trinity Wing I do really like, and I think that just the over synergy, right, of Trinity Wing and Blue Conjurer might be a bit much. And the same case could be made for Trinity Wing plus Owlbeast Sage, but this video primarily is going to be dealing with Blue Conjurer. So again, you'll notice these neutral core Arcanists that just fit into every single Arcanist playstyle. These are the cards that you want, and so when you're getting extra copies of them, it just makes your deck that much stronger. And if you're in a mirror match, Arcanist versus Arcanist, getting these core neutral Arcanists, like getting that extra copy of Owlbeast Sage, could finally be the one that sticks when your opponent is out of removal, right? And so that just gives you a huge advantage right away. And then on top of that, you have the big curve-topping marquee faction Arcanists, right? When Ghost Seraphim and Death Knell and Calligrapher were added to the game, those were supposed to be the big-ticket Arcanists that were defining for the faction-specific Arcanist archetypes. And so Blue Conjurer being able to draw those as well is, it takes away their luster, and it waters down, the differentiation between Arcanist decks overall, and those effects aren't specifically balanced to be in other factions. And honestly, we've all seen how, again, Death Knell can just completely decide a game. It just completely obliterates your opponent, and that again is a card that can be talked about in its own separate video about how ridiculous it is. But when you're going up against Vanar, if they play Death Knell, they're going to be getting more Arcanists on average because of circular. Well, that's the most popular deck, but I mean to say that when you're playing against Vanar, you aren't necessarily going to be playing around other factions' cards. Blue Conjurer just can draw these ridiculous ones. We've seen how, again, extra copies of Owlbeast and Trinity Wing, or getting Four Winds Magi, or Ghost Seraphim, or Calligrapher, right? These huge minions with powerful effects and extra synergy with Arcanists can just blow your opponent out. So I also ran some numbers on the big 7 that I call them. When this card first came out, I figured that somebody would crunch the numbers and just to see how good it is on average. And I guess that I was just so sure that somebody would. Or maybe somebody posted a thread on the subreddit and I missed it, but I figured somebody would say, oh, it has X amount of chance of drawing good Arcanists, X amount of chance of drawing garbage Arcanists, and so you kind of get a good mixture of, good pulls versus bad pulls, right? Like when you play your Keeper of the Veil, you can build your deck to rig it in your favor, but, you still, if you just have it in a regular deck, oh, do I want this larger drop, or sometimes I just get a 2-drop. But anyway, regarding the numbers, there are 29 Arcanists in the game currently, and so casting Blue Conjurer and casting just one spell to draw from it gives you a 24% chance, right, to get one of the big 7. And if you cast 2 spells, which is again pretty easy in the same turn, if it's in the late game, later stages of the game, or higher mana, right, you can play Blue Conjurer and 2 spells. Especially with 0 mana spells, 1 mana spells, very easy to pull that off. You have a 40% chance overall of getting one of the big 7, and if you manage to cast 3 spells, then it ups it to like a 50% chance of getting one of these 7 very impactful minions. Now, if you have Blue Conjurer stick to the board, right? If you can, like, getting the 3 pulls in one turn is kind of doesn't happen very often. Like if you just reloaded with Trinity Wing, then you can go Blue Conjurer, cast all 3 of the teachings of the dragon or whatever. But generally, it's common knowledge that if you play a 5-drop and then it sticks to the board for an extra turn, then you're probably already dominating the game anyway. So the 3 pull statistic is kind of iffy, but I kind of wanted to give you an idea. I think the 1 pull and 2 pull percentages are fine to really read the power of this card with, right? An almost 50% chance, a 40% chance with 2 pulls, and then a 1 in 4 chance almost with just 1 pull from the Blue Conjurer of getting one of the big 7. And so I also wanted to talk about some of the follow-up minions. These ones I didn't feel were as ridiculous as the big 7, but these are the honorable mentions that you can also get from Blue Conjurer. We have, you can see here, the Archon Spellbinder, a big body, increases the cost of your opponent's spells, so it just messes with their game plan, makes your board harder to deal with. We have Eclipse, another big body that does face damage, also really impactful, really great to get off of Blue Conjurer. We've got Kindling, which oddly enough does not see play in Songhai at all, but we've seen some games where Kindling coming down and buffing your Arcanist, especially if you already have a board or just a bunch of illusions in play. Kindling can really multiply that damage, and again, it's a pretty decent body in its own right. Lightbender, I put on the honorable mentions list just because, again, having Dispel, that extra Dispel that your opponent might not necessarily be expecting, or you might not even be running in the deck, is just really great to get, right? You're pulling these minions, even if you had them in your deck, you're still giving the extra opportunity to pull these impactful effects to your hand. You can see that a lot of these are very situational, but still very good. When they're good, they just do a lot of work. We've got Night Shroud as well, which again is a really fun card. I thought that we would see a lot more experimentation with it, but we couldn't really get it to work, right? But Night Shroud in a different deck, something that's not Abyssian, when you pull it from Blue Conjurer and you're able to slap it down on a board, then you're getting extra face damage and extra healing. And so that, just getting a Night Shroud a lot of the times off of Blue Conjurer can also decide a game in the right circumstances. And then we've got Sparrowhawk, and you can already see, right, these Arcanists that aren't good enough to run necessarily in a main deck or in certain factions automatically become more useful when you're just drawing them randomly, because the reason these cards aren't run, again, is because they're more situational. Some of these cards aren't run is because they're more situational. And so when you don't have to run them in your main deck to draw them and, or to top deck a Sparrowhawk when you aren't able to activate its effect, you're just like, oh, that feels really bad. But Blue Conjurer, you play it, you draw Sparrowhawk. Blue Conjurer has a decent chance of sticking around, or one of your other small Arcanists has a chance of sticking around, then you can get Sparrowhawk's effect more easily. Getting a Mist Dragon Seal in factions other than Songhai is something that your opponent is not going to be expecting, and we've seen how that Mist Dragon Seal can just fly a buffed Arcanist into position to get a nice trade or to just go face. So I think that Sparrowhawk, because of the just ridiculous impact it can have if it is drawn in the right circumstances. Again, made the honorable mentions list. So that's what I have for that. The top 13 Arcanists. And once you add those into the pool, hang on a second. Once you add the honorable mentions, right, into the Arcanist pool for Blue Conjurer, these are like the top really great Arcanists that you want to see. With just one spell cast on Blue Conjurer, it's a 40% chance of getting one of these cards. With two pools, it's a 70% chance of getting one of these cards. And with three pools, it's nearly a 90% chance. I crunched it at like 89.6 or something like that, so nearly a 90% chance. And I'm throwing a lot of numbers out at people, which I normally don't do in videos like this because I tend to focus on, just the actual design itself, right? But I think that, again, because I've seen a lack of discussion around what are the odds of this, what are the odds of that, it always feels bad when your opponent gets a good outcome, right? So it doesn't really matter what were the chances of it happening, just like how it was crunched that the chances of somebody getting double flash Juggernaut on their first turn was like, oh god, it was like some really low percentage, right? And it doesn't matter how low that percentage is that it happened. The fact is it still happened to you. So throwing the numbers out isn't like something, again, that you really need to consider, but I think it's just to show how consistently the really ridiculous stuff can happen with Blue Conjurer. And so, with that being said, again, your opponent doesn't know what you're going to get, so they can't play around anything. They just have to assume that you got, the worst case scenario, right? I suppose that when your opponent draws off a Blue Conjurer, you just have to maybe assume they got Death Knell and try to play around that. But Arcanist decks want you to back off and leave them alone. That's how you play around Death Knell, is keeping away from your opponent, right? So the res doesn't get you. But that's what Arcanists want you to do. So it's very hard to even attempt to play around what Blue Conjurer grabs from your opponent. And Blue Conjurer is too limiting to future Arcanist, right? Basically, with this card, they can't give really big marquee Arcanists to factions anymore, because there's a chance that Blue Conjurer can put it in a faction it's not meant to, or the faction that card belongs to could get extra copies of it, and then that just allows them to do more shenanigans depending on the strength of the effect or what have you. And so to balance it out, they would have to make bad Arcanists, right? For every one good Arcanist, you have to make like 4 or 5 bad ones to like balance out the percentage chance of getting good Arcanists. And Duelyst isn't the sort of game that is afforded that luxury, right? Cards like Magic the Gathering or maybe Hearthstone that get larger portions of cards, or Magic the Gathering is famous for printing junk cards, right? That's just sort of their MO. So they can make bad cards on purpose just to fill packs. But with Duelyst, you can't just make bad stuff on purpose, because so much care and animation and all that goes into every single unit that we see in the game, right? They have to make them at least somewhat impactful. There are some cards from like the core set that don't see play, and those are, that's a discussion for a different time. But what I mean to say, this at this stage of development, it would be very, very ill-advised to make bad Arcanists on purpose just in an attempt to balance this one card, right? You just want to fix this card. And so what I'm trying to get at is that you can't really change this card around or make it draw bad stuff. It just needs a full rework. Like, even as a common suggestion for Blue Conjurer is make it so that it can only draw neutral Arcanists and Arcanists from your faction. And so one is that it would make it favor one faction over another, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, if you look at this list, Songhai probably has the most Arcanists right now, with Sparrowhawk, Chakri Avatar, 4 Winds, and Kindling, 3 of which are on this list of very impactful cards. And then whatever, and Calligrapher also, and whatever else they want to print in the future, it would just make it heavily favor one faction. And furthermore, if you made it so that it only drew neutral plus your faction, it only removes, on average, 6 Arcanists or so from the draw pool. So you're still getting pretty decent draws from Blue Conjurer, still getting very strong effects. I've also heard suggestions of maybe making Blue Conjurer a bond effect, where it draws when it comes down and there's an Arcanist already in play. So that would make it more binary, right? Where if you don't have a board prepped for it, then Blue Conjurer is just a 4/6. Boulder Breacher does that as well, right? Where that's the 5 mana 5/5 golem that has the bond effect to mini stun your opponent's forces so they can't strike back. And then if you don't have a golem in play, then it's just a 5 mana 5/5. So that would be an interesting choice to do that. It's just that it makes Blue Conjurer into a Hail Mary RNG draw play, right? Where you pay 5 mana to summon a 4/6 and draw a card. And so again, you still get from this pool the 1 in 4, the 24% chance to draw one of the big 7, or a 40% chance to get one of the top 13 Arcanists here. So let's feeling kind of claustrophobic. Let's get all those off the screen, and so we can refocus in on Blue Conjurer. So we've thoroughly gone over the problems with the card and why it needs to be changed. And so I wanted to also drop on you today, what I thought up to change this card around. I don't have any mock-ups or anything because making this video already took forever. But I just wanted to drop some concepts on you and see how you feel about it for the Blue Conjurer. All right, so I wanted to try to keep with the Blue Conjurer theme, right? It has a really cool summoning animation and attack animation with the blue flames appearing and all that jazz. And it's difficult to rework Blue Conjurer's effect without it being just the bigger version of another Arcanist, right? Because Blue Conjurer right now is basically Circulus on steroids. And I was thinking, what if it had a bond effect that you summon a unit, right? It conjures something when it comes into play, like the blue familiar, they can call it the blue demon or something, like it summons another minion. But then that makes it a Keeper of the Veil effect, right? Where you summon Blue Conjurer, and the only way to balance it is that the blue summon would be like a 2/2. Like the stats on Blue Conjurer are too high. And when Keeper of the Veil, for those of you who aren't aware, was first released, it was a 5 mana 4/5 rather than a 5 mana 3/4. So you got a really good body in Keeper of the Veil plus whatever it summoned. So I stumbled upon that, but that ended up being, really OP. Plus, it's too similar to Keeper of the Veil. They would have to severely lower Blue Conjurer's stats. Or if they wanted to, maybe make Blue Conjurer weak and then make what it summons strong. That would be a nice way to interact with that theme. But you can see that Blue Conjurer, looks really powerful in its own right. So that probably wouldn't go down too well. But at any rate, I thought to myself, what if on the first spell you played, it summoned the blue familiar, right? And then the attack and HP of the unit would be equal to the cost of the spell you played. So that could be really interesting. There's a couple problems with that design in that it's a little similar to Prismatic Illusionist, right? It's a big guy, then you cast a spell, and then you also get a body. And then you get into the issue of if the stats are equal to the mana cost of the spell you played, just getting an extra 1/1 alongside the Blue Conjurer or a 2/2 doesn't seem that bad. But on 9 mana, if you play Blue Conjurer plus a 4 mana spell, and then you get a 4/6 and a 4/4, and the effect of the spell, that seems really ridiculous to me. I was thinking that that would just be utter insanity, because when you think of 4 mana spells, we've got Holy Immolation, uh, and like even if you go across all the factions that wouldn't specifically run this, it still has some pretty hilarious outcomes, like Eggmorph, Breath of the Unborn, Thumping Wave is 4 mana now, and so that like limits what they can maybe do with 4 mana spells if they went that route. Um, and when you think of other 9 mana plays, like Iron Cliff Guardian plus Holy Immolation on 9 mana is a pretty good play. And it's like, is getting a 4/6 and a 4/4 plus Holy Immolation better than getting a 3/10 provoke with airdrop in your Holy Immolation effect? I think that you could argue that is actually a little bit better to get two sizable bodies rather than one larger body with provoke, depending on the situation. So I think that what it might need to do is still draw the minion to your hand. Like, that would be the way to balance it, and have the stats of the spell, right? Where it's conjuring something into your hand, and it would be like a 1 mana minion with the effect of the spell that you cast. That way, if it's a small spell, like a 1 mana spell, then you get a 1 mana 1/1 that you can play. And it would be vanilla. I think I forgot to mention that. I would want whatever it summons to not be an Arcanist, right? You're still getting a really powerful effect by creating bodies, and you're getting the effects of your spells, and you can always replace these things. I think that making them Arcanists, again, just allows you to activate your bond effects, and it just feeds back into itself with Trinity Wing, like we were talking about earlier. So I think that Blue Conjurer, when you cast a spell, you draw like a 1 mana minion with attack and HP equal to the mana cost of the spell you cast. And so this makes it a little bit like a reverse Ghost Seraphim, right? Where you get big body plus spell effect when you bring Ghost Seraphim into play, because it makes your spell free. And this, it just creates a cheap body. And we want it to be 1 mana simply to avoid on 9 or on like 8 mana, right? You don't want to. On 8 mana, you could get a 4/6 and a 3/3, along with a 1 mana. With a 1 mana spell, right? Then you get like a 1 mana 3/3 or whatever. Hang on a second. It would be I'm messing up my math. It would be 5 mana 4/6, and then you cast a 3 mana spell, and then you get a 1 mana 3/3 in your hand. So that would be a 9 mana play to get a 4/6 and a 3/3, which isn't that impactful, but still pretty good, right? And you're still getting the effect of whatever spell you played. And if you wanted to cast something bigger, right, if Blue Conjurer is on the board and you cast a 4 mana spell, so you get your full 9 mana combo in the late game, then you have a 4/4 to play next turn. And then if Blue Conjurer sticks, you have a chance of playing a 5 mana or a 6 mana spell. And so there's still a lot of power there. You could combo this new ability with a reduction of Blue Conjurer's base stats, so that it's easier to clear off the board, so that your opponent can't follow it up with like a really big spell next turn and then a really big body, right? Because if you played Blue Conjurer and your opponent can't answer it, and then you played a Frostburn, a 5 mana spell, and then you get a 1 mana 6/6 on top, a 1 mana 5/5 on top of that Frostburn, then that's like really ridiculous. So I think you can already see like even the effects that I'm coming up with that I think might be decent, there are certain edge cases where they're still really busted. So it comes down to how powerful is this card allowed to be. At the very least, I don't want it to draw random minions that, will just completely decide a game, and neither does anybody else, right? So thank you for listening. Let me know what you think about Blue Conjurer. We all agree that it needs to be changed, but if you heard of any great concepts, or if you have any ideas of your own for what it should be changed to, please let me know, and I will see you next time.